Hello from small town Illinois, Winfield. It is a pleasure to be with you today, even though it's in virtual format again this year. I'm honored by the invitation to participate in this way again, mostly because the topic I get to cover is one of my very favorite ones: how reading about pain is discipleship. My writing professors in high school and beyond were always quick to repeat the old mantra, write what you know. We've all heard that, right? Take pieces of your lived experience and convert them into a story that will hopefully have appeal to a broader audience. And although there are limitations to just writing about what you know, I actually prefer to educate myself in a new area with every book that I write. I did take the admonishment to heart. So there are elements of me, of my life, of my challenges, of my victories in every novel I've written. I grew up overseas, so I write what I call destination novels that introduce readers to the places I love and intimately know. This is part of Write What You Know, right? So I have featured the 18th century castle that I grew up in just outside of Paris, not because I was a princess, but because my parents taught in the Bible school that was housed there. I wrote about the small German village where I lived for 20 years as an adult. I've written about Nepal and Austria and England, all places that I love. Also, because there have been some significant challenges in my life, my novels are journeys to healing. Between childhood trauma and multicultural complications and 3 brushes with cancer, there's been plenty to overcome in my life. So, I cannot write about life without writing about pain. C.S. Lewis put it this way: try to exclude the possibility of suffering, which the order of nature and the existence of free will involve, and you find that you have excluded life itself. My entire life today is actually not about writing. That's what I do in the margins when I have margins. My life is actually centered around helping young people who grew up in the world of ministry, MKs, missionaries' kids, to better understand the joys and the pain that shaped them in order to be able to move into a place of emotional, spiritual, and relational wholeness. I write with a similar sense of purpose, the same sense of purpose that drives me as I serve this people group. I want to explore very real aspects of human suffering in my books in order to be able to point toward the small increments of brightness, God's presence and comfort, whether we recognize them as that or not, that can lead to lasting healing. But here's the problem. Stories that center pain in order to explore healing aren't always welcome or popular among Christian readers. For the reader to get to the character's place of healing, he or she will have to begin when the character is in a place of brokenness. And there are some who find that difficult. I understand it. It's actually because of that reticence to steep in dark places that I insert bright spots into my storylines, quirky characters, magical moments, comical failures, and plenty of light-hearted banter. I don't want my writing to look like the French fare I grew up with growing up overseas. You've seen the movies, you've read the books, the dog runs away, the barn burns down, a tornado comes in and sweeps, civilization off the face of the earth, the end. That is not the type of book that I want to be writing. Still, I know there are some readers who will shy away from stories that contain suffering, and I was one of them years ago, preferring to immerse myself in fluffy tales rather than explore more realistic depictions of life. So I get that. In fact, the first novel I wrote when I was in college, it was called Ravages. Can you guess the genre it was in? It was a lighthearted romance with all the prerequisite elements: the athletic, handsome guy, the book-smart, introverted woman, the quirky dog, the old VW Bug convertible with a defective roll top, and this huge rainstorm scene when the 2 protagonists finally, soggy, declared their love for each other. I'll spare you the rest of the novel. I love the fluffy genre so much that it's actually all I read for years. It felt good, it was entertaining, it was escapism. At its best, there is most definitely a place for that kind of writing in Christian fiction. I truly believe that it is therapy for some of us. And I also firmly believe that there are serious benefits to reading less rosy but still redemptive fare. As I began to untangle some of the pain in my own life in my mid-30s, I realized that I needed to read about healing in order to believe that it was actually possible. As my day job became centered on young people with various wounds that they needed to address and overcome, I understood that exploring pain was indispensable, not only to helping myself, but to being able to help them as well. So I expanded my reading to include writers who were able to weave human tragedy into compelling, redemptive stories. Writers like Pat Conroy, Francine Rivers, or Sue Monk Kidd. That decision had 3 impacts on my life, my reading life, and my external to reading life. It changed the focus of my reading from merely consuming entertainment to learning through entertainment. It proved the power of redemptive narratives to renew my hope in God and in mankind. And over time, it showed me that reading about pain isn't just a way to spend a rainy day. It's discipleship, defined as a lifelong process of learning in which we become more like Christ. Exploring pain, entering into the suffering of others in order to better understand them is a prerequisite for being empathetic channels of the healing God offers. Since then, since I decided to broaden the kind of books I read and wrote, my writing has reflected this core belief. Empathy is impossible without a visceral understanding of the other, others' experiences, others' relationships, others' suffering. And if I am to represent God's heart to the hurting people who may cross my path, I must educate myself in every way I can in order to connect with them better. For me, that includes reading and writing authentic fiction that includes grief, theirs and mine. Henry Nouwen wrote this, and I think it describes some readers of fiction pretty clearly. He said, "Our first, most spontaneous response to pain and suffering is to avoid it, to keep it at arm's length, to ignore, circumvent, or deny it. Suffering, be it physical, mental, or emotional, is almost always experienced as an unwelcome intrusion into our lives, something that should not be there." And yet, Nouwen also wrote this, "Compassion asks us to go where it hurts, to enter into the places of pain, to share in brokenness, fear, confusion, and anguish. Compassion challenges us to cry out with those in misery, to mourn with those who are lonely, to weep with those in tears. Compassion requires us to be weak with the weak, vulnerable with the vulnerable, and powerless with the powerless. Compassion means full immersion in the condition of being human." What beautiful words, right? Is reading about suffering truly discipleship towards an empathic kind of ministry? I so deeply believe that it is. Nouwen goes on to say this, "Ministry means the ongoing attempt to put one's own search for God with all the moments of despair and hope at the disposal of those who want to join this search but do not know how. When we become aware that we do not have to escape our pains, but that we can mobilize them in a common search for life, those very pains are transformed from expressions of despair into signs of hope. I am convinced," he goes on, "that healing is often so difficult because we don't want to know the pain." Listen, I am no Henry Nouwen, but those words are the foundation of my quest to write honestly about the darkness of the human condition in order to point toward the light of divine healing. Because I believe that reading about pain is indeed discipleship, the novels I've written, while balancing the dark with bright sparks of light, don't shy away from the realities so many face. In Tangled Ashes, for instance, while learning about the restoration of that castle I told you about that has obscure ties to an Aryan social experiment in 1944, you'll crawl into the mind of a modern-day American architect whose unresolved losses have led to substance abuse. You'll also be enchanted, I hope, by 4-year-old British twins who subversively teach him to love again. Discipleship in this case will be understanding the spiritual and physical ravages of addiction. And in Broken Places, you'll meet Shelby, a single woman raised in a highly dysfunctional family who inherits a daughter a bit later in life. And there's a long story there that I won't tell you about right now. She moves to Germany to try to start over with a blank canvas with her daughter. You'll learn about the side effects of childhood trauma. That's the discipleship piece. And you'll witness one of the favorite love stories that I've ever written. In Of Stillness and Storm, another of my books, you'll come to understand how an obsession with doing great things for God can lead to the wounding of an entire missionary family. You'll also meet over-the-top characters like Southern Belle Sullivan, whose brief passage through Kathmandu, Nepal, leaves magnolia-scented ripples in its wake. And you'll read about Lauren, whose life was upended by her husband's call to ministry, but whose faith was redefined and strengthened by the suffering it caused. That's her discipleship. In the space between words, you'll follow Jess as she and her best friend head to southern France after surviving the terrorist attacks in Paris. You'll see her find a hidden journal in an antique sewing box and relate in unexpected ways to the Huguenot young woman who wrote that journal back in the 1600s. Then you'll travel with Jess as she traces the Bayard family's escape from France to England. You'll discover the parallels between her life and theirs and learn about how pain can point us towards a God who knows and soothes our suffering. Before I tell you about the last book, Fragments of Light, may I show you just a 1.5-minute video trailer for the book to immerse you a little bit into the mood and the characters that inhabit it, and then I'll come back and tell you about the discipleship that's present in that one. That's Fragments of Light, my latest with Thomas Nelson. And if you read that book, you'll follow two parallel storylines. The American paratrooper who was taken in by two French sisters when he landed off target in Normandy on D-Day, who experienced absolute atrocities during his 3 days in France, and then who walked away from his own young family without explanation when he was sent home. You'll also get to know Celie, a modern-day cancer survivor who, as her marriage struggles post-treatment, finds purpose in figuring out what happened to the soldier who disappeared decades before. The discipleship in this book is about the toll of resentment and the freedom of forgiveness. So, why do I write about pain? I write about pain because it is inevitable. I write about pain because God identifies with ours. I write about pain to point towards the light that surrounds it. I write about pain because healing is possible through the one who redeems it. And I read about pain because reading about pain is more than entertainment. It is essential to forming the kind of empathy Jesus embodied. As such, it is discipleship. Thank you so much for getting to the end of this video. I know it's not ideal to just stare at a face on a screen, but I'm grateful that you listened all the way through to the end. My prayer for each of you as you read, as you make recommendations to the readers in your care, is that you will be able unabashedly to recommend some of these books that delve into pain because of the understanding that it is indeed discipleship. Have a great day, and thank you for your time.